to settle federal claims of discrimination against Jewish employees and students. The agreement follows months of controversy, protests, and suspended funding. Here are the details.
A resolution to months of conflict over campus protests at Columbia University. The university has agreed to settle with the federal government. Columbia says the settlement includes a $200 million payment to the federal government, plus an additional $21 million to resolve employment discrimination claims. In exchange, Columbia regains access to hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding that had been cut off after multiple agencies found the university failed to protect Jewish students. The Departments of Justice, Education, and Health and Human Services said Columbia has shown continued inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students. According to Acting University President Claire Shipman, the agreement will help restore the university's research enterprise and protect its autonomy. In a letter to members of the Columbia community, she stressed the settlement is not an admission of wrongdoing, but she acknowledged the impact of anti-Semitic incidents on campus. She said the university is committed to create a safe, respectful environment, adding it will work on multiple fronts to combat all forms of hatred and intolerance. Earlier this month, the university agreed to a number of policy changes. It also cited action it has taken, including suspension or expulsion of students who violated rules during protests. Columbia will also update its definition of anti-Semitism and expand training on civil rights law. In addition, the university agreed to follow laws banning race-based hiring and admissions. President Trump praised Wednesday's deal, calling it a victory for civil liberties. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi hailed the agreement as a message that no university is above the law. According to the university, the settlement was carefully negotiated to avoid losing accreditation, federal funding, and visas for international students. Acting President Shipman says she hopes the Columbia community is ready to reset and focus again on academic rigor and respectful debate.
Columbia University will pay $221 million to resolve allegations that it discriminated against Jewish students. This will be in exchange for the restoration of federal grants. And in March, several government agencies announced grant cancellations that totaled around $400 million. Columbia University was one of the most active campuses involved in pro-Palestinian protests that swept the United States in 2024. Joining us now to discuss is legal analyst Bobby Ann Cox, civil rights attorney and fellow Brownstone Institute. Good afternoon, Bobby Ann. Good to see you again. So this level of financial penalty settlement, $221 million, is it significant?
Well, excuse me, in the scheme of things, $221 million is certainly a lot of money. However, when you look at what Columbia University is getting for that $221 million penalty, it's not really going to be very onerous for them. First of all, they receive approximately $1 billion with a B, $1 billion in federal grants. And the $400 million in federal grants that were frozen by the Trump administration back in March, that was just a portion of the approximately $1 billion that they do receive annually in federal grants. So when you take that information and then you add it to the fact that Columbia University has an endowment of approximately 14 or 15 billion with a B, billion dollars, the $221 million penalty or fine that they're paying isn't really going to injure the university or be, it would probably I would say it would be a slap on the wrist for them. But the thing that we should really look at here is that this is something that's probably going to deter other universities from stepping into this same arena of not punishing students and who are acting in an illegal manner, violating federal law, violating other students' civil rights and teachers and staff civil rights. So we have to see this as more of a penalty for Columbia University, but also a warning to other universities.
Okay, you said it's a slap on the wrist. Why do you think the Department of Justice and other agencies opted for a settlement? And your thoughts on Columbia not admitting to wrongdoing in the settlement?
Right. Well, it's really how you read the statement that Columbia University's acting president, Shipman, put out about this settlement. She did admit that Columbia did need to and does continue to need to change their their policies, to change how they deal with these situations. So in that sense, there is an admission, although she does start her statement by saying that they're not admitting any wrongdoing. I think what she means there is they're not admitting that they intentionally violated federal laws. But she goes on in her statement to say that the university recognizes that they do need to make changes. They are making changes. They have already started making some of those changes.
So Columbia University last week agreed to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, as well dedicated Title VI, Title VII coordinators, and expanded university-wide education and training initiatives. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that going to improve things?
Well, if they actually do carry out what they say they're going to do, yes, I do think it will improve things because now we have a commitment by Columbia University, its administration, its staff, to move forward, follow our federal laws, and do what universities are supposed to do, and that is be a forum for open discussion, not a one-sided discussion that allows radical students and radical ideas to overtake university, whether it's the quad on the university or the library, which we saw happen back on May 7th of this year, when approximately 100 students took over Butler Library at Columbia University, on a study day when other students were trying to study for final exams. We can't allow this type of behavior. So if they do actually implement and follow the guidelines that are laid out in Title VI, Title VII, these federal laws that are in place to protect people's civil rights in our country, then I do think it will make a difference. And according to Columbia University, they have already started to make some of these changes. And they have, according to Secretary McMahon, she has stated on an interview recently, as this morning, that Columbia will have someone on their campus trying to enforce this, trying to oversee it, trying to make sure these changes actually do happen. And as well as the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice will have a dedicated person that will be in contact with Columbia University, trying to oversee and implement these changes and make sure change is actually happening.
So I just want to build on your point where you said the protests were happening and people were studying. Is there a legal line between protest and anti-Semitism? Where is that line drawn?
Yeah, there's absolutely a line. So, people like to say, especially in these past couple years of unrest with a lot of protests around our country, people like to say, oh, we're just exercising our First Right Amendment to free speech. Yes, absolutely. You have a First Amendment right to free speech in this country. And thank goodness we do. However, that doesn't mean that you can say whatever you want, do whatever you want, wherever you want. You do have to still operate within our laws. So, a group of 100 students going into Butler Library at Columbia University back in May and, chanting, being loud, hanging Palestinian flags in the library, defacing library property, that is not free speech. That is not expressing yourself in a calm and a First Amendment protected right. No, that's not the way to do it. And we saw last year when there were students at Columbia University, blocking Jewish students from getting to their classes. They locked some students inside a building and they were trying to get into the building. They defaced university property. They broke windows. You cannot intimidate other people and just turn to the First Amendment and call that, well, it's just me expressing my First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Because you know what? The person that you're harassing also has rights under our Constitution to not be harassed, particularly based upon their religious beliefs or their race or their national origin. So it definitely is a fine line in some cases, but not in this case. Taking over a library and defacing property of the university is not your First Amendment right.
So then, can you comment on Colombia's new protest restrictions? For example, banning masks and limiting protests near academic buildings.
Right. So what they're doing here is they're trying to say, yes, if you want to have your First Amendment right to free speech, you want to protest and make your voices heard, that's fine and good, but you have to do it within certain parameters so that you don't infringe upon other students' rights to have, like we said in this instance, the ability to study for your exams. So we can see some restrictions happen. And I do think in this instance, those are appropriate restrictions. You know, they're saying you can't wear a mask when you do a protest at the university from now on. Okay, well, they're doing that because they want to be able to identify students if they are acting in an illegal or unruly manner that steps over that line and goes from your First Amendment right of free speech to something that's illegal or harassment or violating a federal law. So I think that these implementations of these restrictions on protests are, from what I've read so far, are pretty common sense restrictions. They are still letting them voice their opinions, just not in a disruptive and illegal manner.
Okay, just one last point. Can you talk to us about where is the line between federal oversight and academic autonomy?
Yeah, so that is a slippery slope. There is a concern there that, you know, the government can step in and say, well, you can do this, you can't do that, you can say this, you can't say that. There's definitely a slippery slope, and we do have to be careful in how much power we give the government to do something like that. You know, our Constitution is written such that the people control the government. We are supposed to be in charge. The politicians, the bureaucrats, they are not in charge. They are supposed to be carrying out the will of the people. So when we get to a point where the government is laying down regulations and restrictions that are too stringent, that becomes an illegal situation. That is unconstitutional. If the government wants to restrict citizens in some manner, they have to have not just a good reason, but they have to prove that this is the least restrictive way that they can achieve the goal that they want to achieve as the government. So it is a concern. We do have to keep our eye on it. The government does not have free reign to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants. And we have to just remember that, because a lot of people, particularly in the past few years, have turned over our autonomy, our power over the government, and just kind of let the government do whatever they want. But that's a dangerous place to be.
Well, Bobby-Ann, always well said. Thank you so much for coming on again this week.
Yes, thanks. Nice to see you again.